All right, everybody, welcome on into KBO Chats Live. I'm Sam Pasco alongside Eric Halterman, and we are breaking down the entire sports betting landscape for Korean baseball. We got some great power rankings, so you understand where these teams are at in case you've been distracted with football or other sports. We'll get you all caught up where you need to be so you can play some bets and make some great DFS lineups as well. I want to dive right into it here, Eric. We got the power rankings. The Dinos seem to be locked in at number one, but that doesn't mean the rest of the playoff field is set. What are we looking at with this playoff picture outlook for the KBO?
Yeah, we've got a pretty huge gap from the Dinos suddenly on the rest of the field. They've opened up an 8-game lead on the Wiz, and it's really running out of time for anybody to catch them. If they've only got 21 games left, the Wiz only have 20. If the Dinos collapsed down the stretch and went just 7-14, the Wiz would still have to go 15-5 to finish as the top seed. The Heroes, who only have 14 games left because they play in a dome and don't get rained out much, they'd have to go 13-1 if the Dinos, again, if they only won a third of their games the rest of the way. So we can't officially give the regular season title to the Dinos just yet, but it's very close. It would take quite a collapse, and they really haven't shown any signs of collapsing with the way they've been playing lately. If you scroll to the right a bit on those standings, you'll see pretty much everybody is between 4 and 6 wins over their last 10, except the Dinos, 8-1-1. And they've played like that over the past 15 games. They only have a single loss and a single tie. Granted, they're mostly playing bad teams, but they're beating up these bad teams. They're outscoring their opponents by an average score of 7.3 to 4.1 over those last 15 games. So winning by an average margin of over 3 runs per game over 15 games is pretty much exactly what you want to see for a team coming down the home stretch here.
Yeah, very impressive stretch for the Dinos that they're currently on right now. You maybe take it with a grain of salt because they are beating up against these weaker teams. Are you concerned at all for, maybe the stretch now where they are playing difficult teams that they might not be as strong as they are looking right now because of the competition?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't expect them to go 13-1-1 over the next 15 or so. But I would take a ton for them to fall out of that top spot. I almost would expect them to not play up to that level, in part just because they've all but clinched that top seed already. And remember that the top seed gives you a bye all the way to the Korean Series. They are accurately named counterpart to the World Series over there. So I would maybe expect them to fall off a bit at the end, but probably that will be mostly because they have no reason to play their best players. I would expect them to stay strong for the next week or so until things are more or less mathematically clinched.
All right, so that's what we're looking at with the Dinos. Moving down the power rankings, we see the KT Wiz now at number 2 for a while. They've settled in at that number 2 spot, still looking for their first ever franchise playoff berth. How locked in are the Wiz right now at that number 2 spot?
Not quite safe, but they have to be feeling pretty safe. They've got a 5-game lead on the Tigers in 6th. Remember, the top 5 teams make the playoffs. It's possible to fall by 6 games over 20, but it would take a pretty bad stretch for them. So I think they're looking pretty safe in that first ever playoff berth. But again, with things so tight, 2 through 5, and really 2 through 7, and with every spot you finish higher in the standings, giving you a bye to the next round. Again, the four plays 5 in a wild card round, and the winner plays 3. The winner of that plays 2. The winner of that plays 1. So each step up the ladder is worth a bye, effectively. So it's going to be really key for them to win as many as they can. I would put them definitely as the team most likely to finish second and get that bye all the way to the semifinals, just given that they've played pretty much as well as the Dinos for most of the season now. They were quite bad for May and part of June, but they've looked this good for quite a long time. So I would have them there, especially because their pitching has stayed strong. That was their huge question early in the year, just allowing 4.1 runs per game over the last 17 games. As long as that remains, I think they should have the clearest path. When you got pitching like that and Mel Rojas Jr., that's more or less all you need.
That's what we're looking at with the Wiz there. Moving down to number 3, in case you are just tuning in, this is KBO Chats Live. We're going over the power rankings right now, looking at the number 3 team, the Deucin Bears. And we talk about this playoff format. you talk about the Bears and the advantage they have, the experience they have in terms of getting back to the Korean series. We talk about, a lot of I think every champion since 2012 has been that number one seed, and the Bears looked like they could potentially be that earlier this season. Fallen maybe lately, but now biggest gainers in this week's power rankings. How confident are you in the Bears? Maybe supplanting the Wiz as that solid number two team in the KBO.
They have a shot. They're going to have to make up a few games on the Wiz if they're to finish second overall. And they were sixth. They were out of the playoffs heading into Friday's game. Things were really not looking good. Their offense had been slumping for quite a while. But then they just stomped the Tigers in a 5-6 matchup over the weekend. 28-6 combined score. Very, very convincing set of wins. And when they've got their pitching back, they've got Chris Flexen. He's looking good for a few starts now after coming back from a broken foot. Wonjun Choi, who took over Flexen's spot and was so good that he remained there, who we'll talk about later because he's going tonight, behind Raul Alcantara, who's in the running for the best pitcher in the league this year. When you've got those three guys, I think that shapes up quite well for any playoff series when you can rely on them for most of the games. And if their bats keep getting hot, most of them started getting hot over the last couple of days. This is an experienced team that in theory should know what it takes in the playoffs for whatever sort of intangible that is. They've been here before. They just have to make sure they actually get there. I do think they're going to actually get there that now that they have a 2-game lead over the Tigers. But they've looked pretty fragile throughout the year. So they're going to need that recent sweep to be the sign of, a new turning of a new leaf for them, because they really have not looked like the Bears are supposed to look for a couple months now.
In case you're just tuning in, this is KBO Chats Live. We are talking power rankings right now of the top Korean baseball teams, and then we're going to be moving into some top picks and some DFS plays for the lineups. Just kind of giving you a quick recap what's been going on with these top teams. The Bears coming on strong with that pitching staff. Talk about Wonjun Choi in just a minute. Moving down, the LG Twins, unimpressive week, like you say here. Biggest news, though, is that Roberto Ramos injury headline. How concerned are you about this Twins offense if they don't have him coming down the stretch?
Well, they do have plenty of guys. I mean, they're second in scoring despite playing in the league's most pitcher-friendly park. So it's definitely not just Roberto Ramos there, but he's the guy who probably has the best chance to challenge Mel Rojas Jr. for the MVP, or at least he looked like he might be back challenging for it after looking like the MVP early in the year. So even though they have plenty surrounding him, it's a huge loss. Hyun-Soo Kim, former major leaguer, incidentally, the only former major leaguer in that offense because Ramos never actually made it there. He topped out at AAA. Hyun-Soo Kim, perfectly capable of leading a lineup by himself. He's top 3, maybe even in OPS, certainly top 5, right there for the batting title. Decent power too. I believe he's second in RBI. He does plenty. So it's by no means going to be a bad lineup without him, but Ramos is a big blow. And they've had another blow actually since I wrote these power rankings. Tyler Wilson, diagnosed with elbow inflammation, I believe is exactly what they said it was. Going to have some shots, presumably cortisone shots over the next couple weeks. The timeline made it sound like he's almost definitely going to miss the regular season, but not a lock to be out for the playoffs. But that's a pretty big loss. He hasn't been all that the Twins would have wanted him to be this year, but he hasn't been bad, and he had the potential to be, quite good. He has been quite good in the KBO in the past. It was quite good at times this year. So even if he's slightly below expectations, that's a big blow to them too.
All right, so the Twins not getting healthy now when they'll need it to gain some playoff ground. See what happens there. Twins in number 4. Moving down, the Kia Tigers are in number 5, up 1 spot. They were smashed by the Bears, like we were just saying, but they are on the outside looking in terms of the actual standings, even though they are number 5 in the power rankings. Are you worried about them now without Aaron Brooks, without basically, guaranteed or almost guaranteed win every 5th day?
Yeah, definitely. It's going to be a tough fight for them to make up those 2 games on the Bears, especially if the Bears really are rounding into form. Maybe you look at them catching up 3 games on the Twins, given the Twins' injuries, or 4 games on the Heroes, who we'll talk about in a second, because the Heroes are really collapsing. So they've got multiple teams. They just need one of those teams to collapse while they stay quite strong. They really need a good week this week, though. They've got the Eagles and Wyverns, and I have a feeling that if they're not winning something like 6 out of the 7 games they have against those 2 this week, that could be the end of their playoff hopes with such little amount of games left in the season. I think they're going to need to be not just a 4-3, maybe not even 5-2. I think they're going to really need to dominate this week, given that, again, it's a 2-game gap to the final playoff spot. It's pretty small, but we're running out of time. So,
all right, I like it. Put some pressure on the Kia Tigers here on the outside looking in. Moving down to number 6, this is normally the spot that belongs to the Tigers. But instead, we see the Kiwoom Heroes. This one is a shocker. They're falling all the way down for number 3 last week. I mean, 3.5 runs per game in their last 7 games. If you take out that 12 spot and that win against the Wyverns, it falls down to just 2 runs a game. This is not what we expected from the Heroes. This is the time when they needed to rally. Addison Russell would finally be settling down. And now we're seeing the exact opposite. What is up with the Heroes right now? And how are they so low at number 6?
Yeah, they've just been on quite a bad run, just winning 2 of their last 10 games. Again, every other team's won at least 4 of their last 10. They can't really hit, as you mentioned. Just outside of that one game, they have 2 runs per game. They're without Byung-Ho Park for a while with, I think it was a thumb. He's out for the rest of the regular season. Addison Russell just hasn't caught fire at all. You would have thought maybe he'd be getting better as this time goes on, but that's just not happening. Ha-Seong Kim has still been all right. They're not totally gone. They have enough talented players there. But it's just a lot of guys underperforming at the same time. I mean, Eric Jokic has still done everything he's supposed to. We'll talk about him later. And they have enough guys that I still occasionally recommend for daily fantasy purposes. I do still think they're going to make the playoffs. They're safe by 4 games at the moment over the Tigers. And again, because they've had so few rainouts because of their dome, they only have 14 games left. And you got to figure maybe just going 6-8 will probably get them in there. But they look a lot less likely to be making a run in the playoffs and challenging the Dinos in the Korean series than they did just 2-3 weeks ago. There was quite a while where I thought they probably were the best, most well-rounded team in the KBO. And once I had firmly decided that, they completely collapsed and have been not that team at all.
Yeah, it's not looking like it right now, especially with that number 6 ranking in the power rankings. Barry's saying the same thing. Heroes bats are missing in action here. Comments are welcome. The chat room is open. If you see a comment and you're on Periscope, but it's probably on YouTube. If you're on YouTube, it's probably on Periscope. We are on both platforms simultaneously right now. Wrapping up the power rankings, last contending team, the Lotte Giants. They are hanging around. Dan Straley is a DFS name to know, but I really don't know if they have enough to compete with all the teams we just talked about, especially if Kia has a strong week against the opponents they're facing.
Yeah, it was a great week for the Giants. They won 5 of 6, just 2 out of 3 from the Twins. Dominated the Eagles. That same 28-6 combined score that the Bears had over the Tigers. Apparently, that's what you do when you blow a team out over 3 games. A 10-0 win and a 14-5 win in their last 2. It is the Eagles, but it's pretty convincing there. So they're getting the job done against the teams they need to get it done against. And they're not out of it. It's 3 games back on the Bears. I certainly wouldn't expect them to close that gap. It would be quite a surprise too to see the team that finished last in the league last season beat out the team that won the Korean series for that final wildcard spot. But again, just the mere fact that they've gone from clearly the worst team in the league to still in the mix with just a few weeks left is definitely commendable. So good job to Dan Straley and the rest of them for fighting it out this long. And I do think they're going to give their fans, something to cheer for at least another week, maybe even 2.
All right, so the Giants are still in it. The other 3 teams, Lions, Eagles, and Wyverns, non-factors really in the playoff picture. So with that, let's dive right in to today's games. We actually have one of those teams. We're starting with with the Samsung Lions. They have forward starter Ben Lively, the former Philly, on the bump tonight against the Twins. Outside one bad start last month, Eric, this guy's been got a great September. ERA under 2, going deep into games. How do we feel about Lively over Nam, who, has been good, but a really small sample size, something we haven't really seen a lot from him. How do we feel with Lively against the Twins?
Yeah, Lively really has been quite good. As you mentioned, he's got one poor start in his last 5. One bad start in September where I believe he allowed 5 runs. And in the rest, he allowed no more than 1. So even with that bad start included, it's a 191 ERA and an 079 whip. And we've seen him be not necessarily this good, but quite a strong arm last season. He had just 9 starts. He came over to KBO quite late in the year. He had a 395 ERA, which is more good than great, but it came with a 24.6% strikeout rate and a 5.5% walk rate. 2 dominant numbers. There was a question earlier about what the league average strikeout rate was. Last I checked, it was between, I think, 17.5% and 18%. I think it was in the high 17s, with the walk rate being right around 9. I'm not sure exactly which side of 9 it is these days, but they've both been hovering around there for quite a while. So he was, a real strikeout weapon last year. Hasn't quite been at that level this year, but 19.8% strikeout rate is still pretty strong. He was just bad early in the year and then also injured. 5.40 ERA through the end of August. But again, given how well he's pitching lately and given that he's shown, quite a bit of promise last year, I think it's more or less for real. Obviously would not bet on a guy having a 191 ERA the rest of the way. But the idea of Ben Lively as frontline KBO starter isn't something that's coming out of nowhere. And I don't think it would be at all unlikely to see it continue here, especially against a Twins team that is without one of its best hitters in Roberto Ramos.
Yeah, I think with this pandemic season, the guys that actually had experience in the KBO last year, maybe a little more comfortable this year with everything going on. In terms of the Twins pitching, what are we going to expect from Honam? Is there anything interesting there? I mean, he only has, 3 appearances on rotowire.com/free KBO. You can check out all the stats and more. That's what site we're using here. Anything? I mean, good numbers, but I really don't know if we can count on him to go longer than 4 innings.
Yeah, he's topped out at 3 innings and 53 pitches in his last outing, all 3 in relief so far. You usually figure a guy can add 15 or so pitches when he builds up between starts, although his last outing here was in mid-September, so I'm not really sure if we should necessarily just add 15 pitches to the 53 he threw there. But in any case, I would be surprised if he's going more than 4, maybe 5. So it might be somewhere between a true bullpen game and a start here. He hasn't been bad. It's a kind of a tiny sample, just 2 runs in 7 innings, 5 strikeouts against 3 walks. Nothing special, though. He does have a 2.18 ERA in the Futures League in just about 20 innings, so not a huge sample there either, but it was pretty good. But he's not necessarily a big prospect or anything. He was just the 45th overall pick in the 2019 KBO draft. So it's not some big name guy about to break through. It looks just like a reliever who's done okay in very limited opportunities. So I wouldn't say the Lions are definitely going to jump all over him here, but I wouldn't expect him to have a shutdown performance.
All right, a young guy in him. I mean, the Lions, we don't expect much from their offense. They do have a losing record. In the last 2 games, they've scored just 3 total runs. But in the 3 games before the last 2, 7 runs per game. So they can score. So maybe there might be a little bit worried for the young lefty there. LG, they score a lot when they win. 25 runs over their last 3 wins. While when they lose, they score basically nothing. 6 just total runs in those last 3 losses. I would imagine you'd have to lean towards Lively, even though the Twins' offense is probably the better unit.
Yep, I am going to go with the worst team here. I think Lively, the way he's pitching, something I forgot to mention, in that stretch of excellent starts, he beat the 4 best offenses in the league, including these Twins, as well as the Wiz, the Bears, and the Dinos. So it's not as if he's beating up on bad teams either. He's already handled this Twins team very easily recently. And so I think the gap between him and Nam, who again just doesn't have much of a track record at all, I think that's enough to outweigh the gap in the lineups here.
The total is set at 9. If the Twins are going to lose, like we're saying, they probably won't score a bunch. Lively can limit them. But the Lions, they could explode. What do you think about that 9 line?
Yeah, it's a pretty low line, but this is in the most pitcher-friendly park, and I think a pick for the Lions implies that Lively's not going to give up many runs at all. So I am going to go with the under here. I don't think the Lions are going to explode against Nam, just because they just don't have much there. They're also too many of their best bats are left-handed. I considered writing up the Lions as one of the stacks for today's DFS cheat sheet, but just without knowing enough about Nam, he really just does not have much of a track record at all, which I guess is better than having a track record of being bad. So I don't necessarily think the Lions are going to explode for a big number here. I would again mention Dong-Hyuk Kim, who we now have as the number 3 hitter, most underpriced player on DraftKings by quite a bit. He's hitting 500 with 2 homers and 8 RBI in his last 5 games, and he's really been excellent for 2 full months now after being quite bad early and demoted a couple times. He's been hitting, I believe it's a 4-digit OPS since the start of August. He's hitting like a star, and he costs like a scrub. So would definitely be interested in him for anyone playing DraftKings tonight.
Definitely love the Dong-Hyuk Kim almost now weekly updates here just because he's been doing so great. 317 average is very impressive. Moving on over to the next game, we got the Doosan Bears against the SK Wyverns. It's a Wonjun Choi day. He hasn't been great in his last start against Hanwha, which all the Bears seem to struggle against Hanwha. ERA near 3 since August, though, so he's been solid. Last time we spoke, you maybe weren't too high on him, but he definitely is going to be a key cog of this Bears pitching staff with Chris Flexen and Raul Alcantara coming into the playoffs. How do you think he'll face against the SK Wyverns that have not been doing well recently?
Yeah, I think I've been, each start that Wonjun Choi keeps doing it, I get more interested in him. Not an elite strikeout guy, but it's hard to complain about what he's done. In 13 starts since joining the rotation when Chris Flexen was out with a broken foot a couple months ago, he's got a 3.09 ERA, 133 whip. Not dominant there, but quite good. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. 17.5% strikeout rate on the year is right around league average, and just 5.6% walk rate. It's pretty good combination. I think he's just keeps proving that he's a legitimate mid-rotation starter or better, and he's facing one of the weakest lineups in the league. There's a reason I've had the Wyverns even below the Eagles for the last few weeks, is they've just looked like uncompetitive for most of their games. I guess they have won a couple against the Heroes to end the week, but it seems like everybody's beating up on the Heroes these days, so I don't know necessarily what's that worth. Jamie Romack has been pretty good lately. He's got an OPS over 1,000 in his last 10 games, but just not a ton there. Jung Choi, I don't think has been at his best for a while either. There's just nothing beyond those guys right now. So I think it should be a very easy assignment for Wonjun Choi, who also on DraftKings, far too cheap. I think he's the second cheapest pitcher on the day. He has no right to be. His points per game on DraftKings are way down, but that's because he was a reliever for the first half of the season. So don't be fooled by that. Definitely, I would have a ton of interest in him tonight.
All right, we like Choi. We're confident in him. In terms of the other key Choi in this game, Jung Choi, he missed some time, but he has a home run since he's returned. Same thing with Jamie Romack. And in terms of bad teams to face, the Wyverns probably have one of the more powerful offenses, even without Tyler White. The line set at 11, which is pretty high. How do you feel about that? I mean, the Bears offense did bounce back against the Kia Tigers, but I mean, this time last week we were talking about the Bears bats being, close to the Wyverns level of bat, just being absolutely cold. What version of the Bears are we going to see, and how will that complement the Wyverns in terms of that total?
I think we're going to see the good version. I really like most of the pitchers on this slate. There was only one lineup that I saw as a clear, obvious stack to recommend for today's cheat sheet, and it was this Bears lineup. Gyeonwook Lee, shaky at best, and he's not at his best at the moment. In his last 6 starts, it's an ERA of 8.89, a WHIP of 171, 3 more walks than strikeouts over his last 6 starts. So just nothing has gone close to well for him. Even when things are going well, he looks like a number 4 or 5 starter. He was lit up by the Dinos his last start, 6 runs while recording just 4 outs. Anytime you allow more runs than outs, not close to good. On the season as a whole, the walks are his problem. He's got a walk rate of 14.3%, which is the worst walk rate among pitchers with at least 100 innings pitched, and also a below average strikeout rate by just a bit. So just no reason to be afraid of him here. If the Bears hadn't exploded for 28 runs over the weekend against the Tigers over those 3 games, I would be a little more nervous here. But these are good hitters. They were just all cold at the same time, and most of them are starting to wake up again. And I don't see any reason to believe they'd go back into hibernation against somebody like Lee.
And Barry here noting Choi with an unreal stat line against SK. The line here, Bears big favorites, 11 runs. What's the pick here, Eric?
Yeah, I don't think the Wyverns are going to help hit that over much, but I think this could be a game where the Bears get close to it all by themselves. So I'm going to go over and Bears.
All right, then. Moving on over to the third game, we got the KT Wiz against the Lotte Giants. We got Odrisamer Despaigne going for the Wiz tonight. He's going to be a key part of this Wiz team if they want to have a real chance at dethroning the NC Dinos come playoff time. He hasn't been amazing recently, maybe been about average, and especially a little better when he doesn't face Dong-Yeop Kim, who we're talking about with the Lions. What version of Despaigne are we going to get against the Lotte Giants?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting mix. It got lit up last time, 5 runs on 12 hits. But 6 strikeouts against 1 walk was at least a small silver lining in that start, especially because in his last 4 outings, it was just 11 strikeouts against 10 walks, which is far from dominant. That's quite bad. Although he was not really giving up a ton of runs in those starts. I believe one of them he gave up quite a few, but mostly he was keeping runs off the board. So it's been a pretty strange mix for him. He's been kind of liable to getting blown up throughout the year. I think he has an 8, maybe a 10 in the game log early in the season. And it's been quite a while since he had a really dominant strikeout performance, yet he's not necessarily giving up a ton of runs. So he does not look like that frontline starter that he really should be as one of the team's 2 foreign pitchers. But he hasn't been bad. And on the season as a whole, 17.7% strikeout rate is right around league average against a 7.2% walk rate, which is slightly better. So that adds up to a solid 3, maybe a 2, albeit maybe a low strikeout 2. An ERA in the low 4s seems to be more or less what he deserves. So I don't think he's a dominant shutdown arm. Hasn't been pitching like one lately. But most of his recent starts have gone pretty well. But again, like you said, which version are we going to get here is somewhat tough to say. I don't have a lot of confidence that we're going to get the very good version.
He has been shaky recently, and he can be prone to giving up a lot of runs. In terms of Lotte's pitcher, Sewon Park, he's serviceable, if we can give him a compliment there. He was decent against the Twins his last time out. ERA under 3.5 since August. I mean, that's all right, but an ERA over 4.20 on the season. What are we looking at with Park facing off against Mel Rojas Jr. and that Wiz offense?
Yeah, he's kind of taken a different path to get to more or less the same place as Despaigne, I would say. He was quite bad early, but in his last 9 starts, his ERA is 2.98. And he avoids blowups all year, whereas Despaigne is usually pretty good, but occasionally quite poor. He's never allowed more than 5 earned runs and only twice allowed more than 4. And he hasn't allowed more than 4 since June 13th. He's had 4 or fewer runs in every start since then. Not necessarily stringing together dominant performances lately, but generally keeping his team in it. And the 2 starters, interestingly, they've got strikeout and walk rates within half a percentage point of each other. So it's two very similar guys there. Park, I would say, has been on the whole better lately. But you got to factor in a pretty big gap in the 2 offenses. Mel Rojas Jr. for the Wiz, back on top of all 3 Triple Crown categories. Got a pretty safe lead in homers and RBI. I'm not necessarily sure he's going to hold on to the batting average title. He's up by just a single point on Asap San of the Giants, which will be interesting to watch the battle between those 2 as they fight for the batting title here. It's three games of them going off against each other. Should be fun to watch. So definitely a tough assignment against Rojas, and it's not just Rojas. Obviously, Beko Gong and Jae-Gyun Hwang have been very reliable right and left-hand men right next to Rojas this season. So it's not an easy task for Park, but it seems pretty safe to say he'll at least keep the team in it and give up no more than 4. I think he's got a good shot at, baseline quality start kind of day. 6 innings, 3 earned runs seems to be close to what you can expect from him.
Yeah, and just going to Mel Rojas Jr. here, the Triple Crown watch, he's been doing great. And I got to say, his October has been scary. When we look at his game log here on rotowire.com/free KBO, you see it's just been insane. I know he had that 10-week stretch with the OPS over 1,000, but now it seems to be doing even better. I mean, it's crazy to say October could be his best month, but that's the way it's looking with all those home runs, all those hits. So to check out even more stats, check out rotowire.com/free KBO for all the stats here that we're looking at to make some great picks and some lineups. The total here is set at 10 runs, which Mel Rojas Jr. could hit on his own. But Despaigne and Park can be good for maybe holding down 3-4 runs and limiting offenses. Where are we going with the picks here?
Yeah, it's a pretty well set line, I think. 2 good enough pitchers against a pretty good lineup in the Wiz and a pretty mediocre one in the Giants. The Giants have been hitting well lately too. Yoon-Suk Oh just hit for the cycle and drove in 7 runs on Sunday, their leadoff man. He's got an OPS of 14-11 in his last 10 games. So there's a couple guys on the Giants worth looking at for fantasy purposes, and they do have a decent amount of depth of playable, if not star hitters. I am actually going to lean slightly on the Giants side just because I think Park has been more consistently reliable than Despaigne. But I think this one is very close to a toss-up. You could just say Mel Rojas and say no more and pick the Wiz, and I would not argue with you very strongly. And again, Despaigne has gotten away with it in most of his recent starts, but Park has been a little bit more reliable, and the Giants are hitting well too. So I'm going to pick the Giants, and I'm also going to pick slightly to the over because neither pitcher I don't think is a shutdown arm these days, even if they're both decent enough. And I think if I'm picking the Giants, I'm going to need them to score enough to out-hit Mel Rojas. So I could easily see this as a 6-5 win for the Giants, something tight like that.
That's not going to be an easy feat if you're banking on the Giants outscoring Mel Rojas Jr., but we'll have to see. Giants are on a 4-game winning streak at 12 runs per game over their last 2, which is crazy to say because that's actually more than the Wiz have in their last 2, which is just 10 runs per game. So we'll have to see which offense comes out on top against 2 shaky pitchers. Moving on down, we have a great matchup. The matchup to watch, the NC Dinos against the Kiwoom Heroes. Eric Jokic tries to turn things around for the struggling Heroes right now. His last 4 games, he has an ERA exactly at 1. I don't think I've ever seen that. I thought that's kind of a interesting little stat note there. But what can we expect from Jokic? Can they turn their fate around with him on the bump, even though they're facing off against the hottest team in the KBO?
Yeah, this wouldn't be much of a game if you look at the recent form, but I think Jokic definitely keeps the Heroes in it against the league leaders in the Dinos. Jokic has been dominant all year. leads the league in ERA at 204 and WHIP at 099. 18.3% strikeout rate isn't super high, but it is slightly above average. And his 4.0% walk rate is less than half of league average. So he's a control guy who has more than just control, not elite strikeout upside, but plenty of strikeouts to the point that you more or less buy maybe not necessarily the entirety of his 2.04 ERA, but he deserves quite a good number. He is very legitimately in conversation as the best pitcher in the league this year. He had one bad outing recently, his first outing back from a minor shoulder issue where he only lasted 2 innings and gave up 4 runs against the Wiz. But then since then, just 3 total earned runs in 4 starts, 27 strikeouts against just 2 walks in his last 4. Those are some of his bigger strikeout numbers of the year, too. Striking out a batter per inning over those 4 is not something he necessarily normally does. He's going to need to do that, and it's not going to be easy because the Dinos can really hit. League's best lineup for a reason. They're incredibly deep, but I think he has a shot to. He's done it in the past.
All right, we'll see what Jokic can put together on the bump. Turning our attention over to the Dinos starting pitcher, Kim. Ugly ERA, but has been dominant. Next level stuff from Kim in his last 2 starts. 12 total innings pitched, just 1 run, 14 strikeouts against 0 walks. We're big fans of the strikeouts and the walk numbers here on KBO Chats Live. And I got to think you'd be liking him a little bit when you look at those numbers over those last 2 starts.
Yeah, there's enough about him that he might actually be able to hang with Jokic, especially against a struggling Heroes offense. He started the season in the rotation for the Dinos, Youngwoo Kim, the young lefty, just 20 years old. He had a 5.50 ERA in 4 starts, and then they removed him from the rotation. He went on to give up 10 runs in 8.1 innings as a reliever, while also spending some time in the Futures League. But he's come back up as a starter in September, and in 5 starts, he has a 3.38 ERA and a WHIP of just 1. And as you noted, he was even better in the last 2. Dominant 14-0 strikeout to walk ratio over those 2. Against a pair of bad lineups in the Lions and Wyverns. But I think it's pretty safe to say that if he faced a better lineup, he still would have had a pretty good day looking at those numbers there. On the season as a whole, his 18.1% strikeout rate is right around Jokic's as a hair above league average, and his walk rate is just 2.8%. Barely issues any free passes, which you like to see, especially from a guy this young and from a guy who does still get some strikeouts. So I think he's a pretty good play for fantasy purposes. Getting a win is harder than normal when you're facing against Eric Jokic, but this Heroes lineup has not been great lately, and Kim really has. So I think he's got enough about him to make it a game.
All right, that's the pitching matchup for this Dinos and Heroes matchup. In terms of offense, the Dinos have a ton of it. They've been great, first in every offensive category. We take a look at rotowire.com/free KBO. First, every category that matters. The Heroes, they're 5th in runs per game and 8th in batting average. They're not too impressive, but they do walk a lot, which is something we'll have to see it play out against Kim, who doesn't walk a lot of guys. The total is set at 9.5, and it will be played because it is in a dome. What do you think about these offenses tonight, Eric?
Yeah, I would definitely avoid all the Dinos against Jokic for fantasy purposes unless you're just trying to spike something in a big tournament and get lucky and have Jokic have an off day. I love a lot of the Dinos hitters, as you'd expect for the best lineup in the league. Yuji Yang, I mean, he's excellent. He's been great for years, and he's only gotten better as the season's gone on. Over his last 48 games, he has an OPS of 1158. And for a catcher who's in his early 30s to be nowhere close to breaking down at this stage of the season and only getting better as the year goes on, it's very impressive. But I don't think I would shell out for him against Jokic. And I don't think I would be going with any of the other Dinos either. And not enough of the Heroes are very interesting. Lately, though, I did recommend Ha-Seong Kim. He will get the platoon advantage against Youngwoo Kim, the lefty. And he has missed a bit of time recently to a couple minor issues, a hamstring. He's kind of had nagging, mostly leg issues throughout the year, but he's still been excellent all around. 27 homers and 21 steals. Him and Aaron Altherr are the only real true power speed combo guys in the KBO. He also hits for average and plays shortstop. He's got a shot at coming to MLB next year. There was talk about him getting posted, I think, because the Heroes wanted the money, essentially. I think they're one of the cheaper teams in the KBO, despite being one of the better teams. I definitely think Ha-Seong Kim has a chance to be a legitimate major leaguer. It seems like he should be able to at least get by everywhere. I don't know if he can necessarily dominate over here, but he dominates in Korea. And so I pretty much am always interested in him for fantasy purposes. Even though Youngwoo Kim has been better lately, I would not hard avoid the Heroes hitters. So I think with on that note, I just think the gap between Jokic and Kim is too big for me to not pick the Heroes. Even though the Dinos have been way better lately, even though the Heroes have been terrible lately, even though Youngwoo Kim has been pretty good lately, this is still, probably the best pitcher in the league. And I don't think I can pick against the best pitcher in the league, even with all those other things.
And is he going to shut them down and have no scoring at all? 9.5 is pretty low for these two teams. If you look at, any other matchup in terms of outside of their current success, 9.5 is the total.
Yeah, I'm going to go under. I think given that I like Youngwoo Kim enough to, I don't necessarily see the Heroes scoring a ton of runs here, but I don't think they'll need to, given how Jokic is pitching.
All right, last matchup wrapping up here. One of the more boring ones here, two teams look on the outside looking in, the Eagles and the Tigers. Ganyan facing off against Sappold. Ganyan was featured in the power rankings as the DFS name to know for the Tigers. But in terms of the last 4 starts, Sappold actually has the lower ERA. So, never like to pick the Eagles, especially when they've proven they're just not a good team. But with Sappold on the mound, maybe, and the Tigers are coming off an absolute beatdown. Maybe.
Sappold is coming off one very good start in which he allowed just a single hit in 7 scoreless innings against the Bears. Granted, it was while all the Bears were terrible, but it's still the Bears. Just hard to complain about one hit in 7 innings. But that followed 3 straight starts where he walked more guys than he struck out. Didn't necessarily get punished in all of those. Only 2 earned runs in the latest of those 3. But it's been a pretty extended run of mediocrity from him. I actually had the Tigers as my second stack on my cheat sheet today. I wouldn't have recommended a mediocre offense like theirs against a guy like Sappold coming off a strong start on most slates. But really, I just think the pitching here is far deeper than normal. I really think after Gyeongwook Lee, and I guess Honam for the Twins, who we just don't have any reason to believe as much of anything yet because he's barely played. There's something with most of the guys here. I don't think there's a lot with Sappold, though. He was quite good early in the year. Through the end of July, he had a 3.50 ERA. But since the start of August, he has a 6.43 ERA. And it's going to take more than that one excellent start for me to think that he's fully back in his early season form. He really just doesn't strike out enough guys. 13.2% strikeout rate on the year. Just gives up too much contact. So I think the Tigers' top bats here should be pretty interesting.
In terms of that offense that we're seeing from both these teams, they've both been averaging about 2 runs a game over their last 3 games. The total set at 9 runs. And we're thinking the Tigers are going to pretty much score that if Sappold, does what he does and walk a lot of guys and maybe get a big hit from Tucker Choi in the heart of that lineup. What are we looking at with that offense specifically?
Yeah, Hyungwoo Choi is actually now the Tigers' best hitter if you go by OPS. Preston Tucker hasn't been terrible. I think he has only 1 hit in his last 3 or something like that, but he's been generally pretty good. But Hyungwoo Choi has been very good for quite a while. I mean, he's a veteran slugger who's been excellent for several years. I think his lowest OPS in his last 6 or 7 years is 897 or something like that, 896. He's very, very consistent, strong hitter. Him and Tucker are a very strong pairing of lefties at the heart of the order. They don't have enough help, but I think unless Soppold repeats what he did last time, which he generally hasn't been capable of recently, I think the Tigers should score plenty. But I'm not sure the Eagles are going to do much of all against Gagnon. Gagnon, again, he's somebody I liked a lot early in the year. In his first 13 starts, he had an ERA of 3.53, was striking out a batter per inning. But then his next 4 were awful, 9 ERA in his next 4. And it looked like he was falling off a cliff. But he's getting things back together now. Over his last 6 starts, an ERA of just 2.35, a whip of 102. He hasn't quite recaptured his early season strikeout numbers, but just about everything is going right for him. And given that he's facing the league's worst offense in the Eagles, I think I'd be very excited to own Gagnon in daily fantasy tonight.
All right, so we're going to go with the Tigers. They're big favorites, and the total's at 9. We going over that with Choi and Tucker at the heart of that lineup?
Yeah, that's a very low over-under, given that I only like one of the pitchers here. I don't think Gagnon is going to give up too many, but even if the Eagles manage, say, 3, I think the Tigers should pretty easily get to 6 or 7. So I will go over there despite liking Gagnon.
All right, not betting on Soppold to repeat his performance last time out against the Bears. And that's all 5 games we previewed. Now moving into the top 3 picks here. Some interesting matchups. We looked at Ben Lively, looked at Despaigne, Won-Jun Choi, some great pitchers. Where are you going for your top 3 picks for the evening, Eric?
The top one is going to be the Bears. I think that's top by quite some margin. We know that team against the Wyverns generally works. And given that this is quite possibly the weakest arm on the slate in Gunwook Lee, or one of the weakest couple against a pitcher who's been quite solid in Won-Jun Choi, and given that the Bears lineup seems to be waking up again, I think that's pretty easy number 1 for me. Number 2, the game we just talked about, Tigers over Eagles. Again, team against the Eagles generally works pretty well as well. Gagnon has been pitching like you want him to lately. Soppold, outside of pretty much just his last start, has been quite bad for about half the season now. If you want to bet on him continuing that, it's not a terrible upset pick, but I would not expect that. And for number 3, it's a lot tougher. I think the candidates that I'm thinking about for number 3 are Jokic against the Dinos, but man, the Dinos have been so good lately. Lively against the Twins, but again, that is an upset pick. Perhaps the Dinos Heroes under. And I think what I'm going to go with is that Dinos Heroes under. I think I like that slightly more than the other 2, just because I really think Jokic, even against a lineup as good as the Dinos, should keep his side of that number down quite low. And I've liked what I've seen out of Youngwoo Kim lately, while not liking much from the Heroes lineup. So I think that's going to edge out those other 2 for me. But I could have gone with any of those 3, I think, for the final spot.
That's what we're looking at. The Doosan Bears, the Kia Tigers, and the under 9.5 in that NC Kiwoom game. Those are Eric's top 3 picks. Barry, we had some comments here. He also liked Doosan and Kia. He went with Samsung there, banking on Ben Lively's excellent September. Is that pretty much in the mix? You mentioned that as one of them.
Yeah, definitely. But picking the Lions there is pretty much picking Lively, I think. Again, we haven't seen anything really from Honam, but pretty good numbers in the Futures League too. And given that the Lions don't have an excellent offense, I don't think it's super one-sided, but I do think Lively has been very good. So I think that one should definitely be in conversation.
All right. And that's our show. Thank you for tuning into KBO Chats Live. Top picks again, Deuce and Bears, Kia Tigers, and the under 9.5 in the NC Dinos Kiwoom Heroes game. Thank you guys for tuning in.
Yeah, thanks for coming, everybody.